Hey, everybody. I have something that I wrote a couple of years ago that I found when I was cleaning out my house. We're moving. And so I've been going through all this stuff. And I found this piece that I wrote a couple of years ago that is just as relevant today as it was when I wrote it. I wrote it long before I had a podcast. So I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Parenting Successful Teens, the podcast that cuts through the overwhelm and stress of this phase and offers parents simple, practical, cognitive, science-based strategies for keeping their teens on track. Join Master Coach and real-life mom, Allie Irwin, to talk about real teens, real problems, and the skills it takes to raise successful adults.
There was a family in New Jersey, near the town where I used to live, where their 15-year-old son had run away from home after he and his father had had an argument. And the parents were desperate to find their kid. They had had this argument about their son's grades, and then the son had emptied his bank account and packed his bag and taken off. And everything about the story was just heartbreaking because you could see that these were good parents. There was, like I said, there was no evidence of abuse. And the son, the way he left sounded so incredibly responsible that it was hard. The whole situation was just heartbreaking. And so there were all these pleas of different people watching out for him, watching the train stations, and trying to get this family back together again. So I'm going to start with the father described the situation like this. The father of the boy that ran away. He said, "The argument about his grades may have been the trigger. I was just trying to motivate him and get him to live up to his potential." Just, as I said, no evidence of abuse, just good parents pushing their kids to be the best that they could be. And I felt for that dad because that was me too. I mean, that was, I think, most of the parents in our area. We were in a very high-achieving college prep kind of town, and every parent was pushing their kids to be their best. No, maybe not every parent, but lots and lots of parents. And when my son entered high school, I had big dreams for him. He was crazy smart. Now we're talking about my story. When my son entered high school, he's so crazy smart, eloquent, personable, creative, handsome. Seriously, he had so much going for him. The world was his oyster. And we weren't the only ones. That is not just mom bragging. I have outside evidence. He was amazing. Colleges wrote him at his junior year, asking him to skip his senior year and early admit. Teachers would give him the teacher's favorite award. In the town that I used to live in, they had these awards that each department could pick so many kids that were their favorite kids. These weren't the kids with the highest grades. The speeches that teachers gave about the kids were amazing. It was my favorite thing to go to in a year because they talked about kids being passionate about the subject material and asking great questions and helping out their classmates. This was the award kind of for everything else except, besides just the grades. These were for truly amazing students. And that's what was happening. And I could see the future of his dreams. And it was easy in the early years because the future of his dreams and the future of my dreams lined up. They were the same. And the specifics of what that dream was would change from year to year, chemistry researcher, writer, economist, lawyer, that would change. But what didn't change is the bright, bright future. But as his high school wore on, he lost interest in school. He transferred from the rigorous Jesuit high school that he started high school out at, and then transferred back to our local public school, and his grades started to slide. And we did all the things that good parents do. We took him to see a counselor and then a different counselor. We made sure there weren't any drugs or substance abuse involved. We made our home a place where his friends could hang out, even though we didn't really love who he was hanging out with these days. We monitored his grades in the parent portal, not to make sure that he got all A's, but just to make sure that he was literally turning everything in. And we argued with him about his future and his potential like an Olympic sport. None of this did any good. I spent a lot of time crying, trying to figure it out, feeling like I was doing something wrong, feeling like it was my responsibility to get things back on track. Until one day I was crying my way through Target yet again and thinking about this dad whose, kids had just run away, and finally realized that asking him to live up to his potential was actually hurting his potential. Because the more I pushed him towards my vision of what was possible for him, the harder he fought against it. So what I did is I backed off and started giving him more space to explore his dreams. We stopped talking about universities and started talking about trade schools. I got him involved in I helped him set up with interviews with people that he admired to learn more about what it was like to actually do their job and what it took them to get to where they are. And most of all, more important than any of those actions, what I did is I started looking for ways that I could be proud of who he was instead of who he could be, who he was going to become. And when I did that, I realized there were a lot of reasons to be proud of who he was, even with the marginal grades, even with the sketchy friends. I realized when I turned my attention to who he was, I could start to see how much courage it took to swim against the tide in our small town, where 98% of the graduating class, 98%, like if you do the math on that, in our class of 300 kids, 6 of those kids statistically would not go on to a 4-year school. And a third of those kids were going to go on to colleges like Columbia, Cornell, Princeton, NYU. It took great courage for him to choose his own path. I trot those stats out not because I believe that that's that's the highest and best. I trot those stats out to say that's the environment he was operating in. That's what he was seeing rewarded all around him. And so it took great courage for him to say, that's not for me. I could do that, but I don't want to. And it took, I started to see what a hard worker he was. Just because he wasn't working hard in his classes didn't mean that he wasn't a hard worker. He was going to school full time and working almost full time at a pizza parlor, to the point where he sort of became the weekend manager. In addition to all the hard work that he was doing, once I started to shift my focus, I turned toward the hard work that I needed to do. The hard work it took for me not to apologize or make excuses for his choices at my book club, to concerned friends, to, the people that I went to church with and our neighborhood friends who didn't understand why I was letting him make the choices that he was making. Okay? The more that I did my own work, the more that I realized that there was nothing to apologize for. There was so much to be proud of that I was missing when I was focused on his potential. And the prouder I became of who he already was, the more I could see the fallacy in that whole idea of getting our kids to live up to their potential. Because here's the thing. Pushing him to live up to his potential is not the same thing as having high standards. What it is it's a rejection of who he was in favor of who he could become. And I was done with that. I decided to be proud of who he was right now. Okay, I decided to trust in our ability to navigate a different path, a path that was uniquely his own. And I put the ball in his court to figure out who he was going to become. Okay, I was there, ready to help, but I stopped feeling like it was my job to make things happen. The fighting stopped. He made plans. He worked hard. He made new plans. I mean, this is real life. Not all those plans went well. And he asked for help when he needed it, right? Because I had become an ally in him figuring it out as opposed to the person he was pushing against. We started having fun as a family again, right? Like the fighting stopped and we started having fun as a family again. We didn't waste those final years when we were together being adversaries. Like we got on the same side. And that matters. That's what develops the relationship, where they will ask you for help when they need it rather than you being the thing that they're rebelling against. When I stopped pushing my son to live up to his potential, he started to blow my mind about what his potential really was. Now, I wrote the bulk of that, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago. I mean, a long time. And let me tell you, sometimes when you're in the thick of things, you're like, well, I don't know if this is going to work out, but it sure beats fighting all the time. It sure beats crying my way through the grocery store and Target and Costco and all the places because I'm spending so much of my time crying that I literally can't, black out time to run errands. When I see those notes from a bunch of years ago, like this is the epilogue. This is the good news epilogue, is when I look at those notes from a bunch of years ago, I didn't know at the time how things were going to work out, right? Like I was still in the thick of it and I didn't know if what I was doing was going to turn out well. I just knew that arguing and fighting with him all the time was going so poorly that I had to do something different. But now, 5 years later, I can see how that really set him up to take responsibility for his life. Like there is no way I could have foreseen that he would start his own company, move to Europe. He's at one of the top salons, barbershops in Europe. People fly him around the world to teach barbering classes. And there's no way I could have known that that's what was going to happen for him. All I knew at the time, like I said, is that I was done rejecting who he was currently in favor of who he was going to become. And that loving who he was allowed him to expand in all the ways. Like there just became more and more and more to love. And that's really the benefit of not focusing on someone's future, but turning your focus to loving them now. See you next week. Hey, if you enjoyed today's show and you want even more support and a shot of fresh inspiration in your email box each week, you have to get on my list. Sign up to receive my free guide on how to stop second-guessing yourself as a mom. There are so many decisions to make as a mom, and this guide will help you to make decisions and just move on. No more waking up 3 a.m. wondering if you made the wrong decision. This guide is so good. Even my non-mom clients are raving about it. So sign up today, and I will see you next week.